Michael, you're such a good son. Wouldn't it be nice if we all headed down to the pub with your friends, ate peanuts, and drank warm beer in the dark while we wait out the zombie apocalypse? I might even find some flowers in the street. Okay, peanuts, fine. The dark, fine. But you don't have to settle for beer, no matter whether it's warm or not. Especially draft beer. That stuff is deadly. At least it is to me. No, try something with more zing. Try Spark Plug coffee. Okay, you English folks, you'll have to move over to North America, and then you can buy Spark Plug coffee. That's our sponsor. We can tell you that they provide the freshest, fairly traded, premium Arabica beans in Canada. Sparkplug delivers their stuff to lucky people in the US and Canada, and they do it within a week. Canadians even get free shipping. You can choose from a veritable plethora of blends and roasts. They even shake up your options by providing a rotation of seasonal blends. And if you gotta have the half calf or the decaf, Sparkplug will not let you down. They've got those types of beans too. And my blokes, if you become a member of the Autopilot Coffee Club, you will get deals and perks. Perks. It always amuses me a little bit there. The non-members will not. You'll also save dollars every time you order. You can even get all specific and customize that membership, which means you'll only get orders when it suits your drinking needs. This, you British ne'er-do-wells, is not a typical Coffee of the Month club. Their handy-dandy website is sparkplug.coffee. In fact, go to sparkplug.coffee/HYES, because then you can use our discount code. Putting the letters HYES into the right box will save you 20% off your next order, and that's a one-time offer. Okay then, this might be the month when we talk about horror films, but we're about to discuss one of the all-time funniest movies that has blood in it. Let's get to the main event.
And action!
Have you ever seen Shaun of the Dead? Hey, you jolly good friends, and thank you lots for joining us for episode number 615 of the Classic Movies podcast known as Have You Ever Seen? That Join Us reference is one of the many references to other movies and other horror movies in Shaun of the Dead. Let me warn you right now that we'll be in full-on spoiler mode today, and welcome to our 9th annual Scary Movie Month. We'll be talking horror from now until Halloween. I already reviewed Black Christmas on my own last Friday to get us started, but this is the first time we're both on the podcast here in October, the month of chills and screams. Black Christmas was intense and a straight-up horror film. The next 2 Mondays, though, will be about horror comedies. And who are we? Well, I'm the underachiever from East Toronto who's got red on him and who often farts just to make his best friend laugh. That's you.
That is true. Never fails.
Ryan Ellis. And here's the lady who walks around town oblivious to all the carnage around her and who just might be willing to wear an I Got Wood t-shirt. My wife, Bev.
That's me.
We were both mixtures of Shaun and Ed there. Little combinations of the two. All right, the coming attractions trivia questions for Shaun of the Dead. Edgar Wright has not directed a film since Last Night in Soho 3 years ago, which we didn't love. A lot of people loved it. We didn't love it that much. He has a couple things in the works, though, and one of them is a remake of which 1980s action film?
The Running Man, starring America's only movie star, Glenn Powell.
He's obligated to be in everything.
I don't feel bad about this movie getting remade. I even feel like Edgar Wright might be a great choice. I'm quite curious to see it.
I don't know if I love the casting, but I will be curious to see what Edgar can do with that story. If they do it like the book, the Stephen King short story, not the silly way Arnold and Friends did in 1987.
I never did read The Running Man, even though I read the other books. Yeah. I love the other books he wrote during that period, the other novellas like Rage and The Long Walk. I should check it out.
The other movie that Edgar has in the works, which I don't think he had when I first said the next movie he's supposed to do. Now it's 2 that are in pre-production. It's more of a thriller by the sounds of it, a crime mystery type of thing. I forget the name of it. I didn't write that down.
I'm more interested in The Running Man anyway.
Oh, yeah. All right then, Funny Zombies was released in the UK on April 9th, 2004. Then Universal turned it loose over here 20 years ago in the fall of 2004. And it was a word-of-mouth hit. I heard about it, had to see it in the theater, loved it then, I've loved it since. But Bev, Shaun is 20 years old now, so remind us of the goings-on in his movie by giving us the skinny on Hymn of the Dead.
Simon Pegg is Shaun, an electronics salesman living in London. His best friend Ed has been overstaying his welcome on his couch, and his girlfriend Liz just dumped him for being stuck in a lackluster rut. Then, to make things worse, the city is overrun by a zombie apocalypse. So, Shaun and Ed take the car, grab Shaun's mom, stepdad, Liz, her 2 roommates, go to the local pub, have a nice cold pint, wait for the whole thing to blow over. Well, that was the plan. But things were a little dodgier out there than Shaun expected, and the group succumbs one by one until there's just Shaun and Liz left by the time the military come to rescue them.
With Yvonne, his former girlfriend, I guess it's supposed to be?
Or friend, yeah. The actress from Spaced.
Jessica Hines, or Jessica Stevenson she was back then, I believe. And also, Philip doesn't make it that far.
I ran it under a... You do it better than me.
One of the great lines in this film is about the zombie bite that Philip suffers. I ran under a cold tap.
So British.
Even if it had been some kind of scratch from a nail, I don't think running under a tap is enough for there, sir. Never mind when you're bitten by somebody. And never mind when he's a zombie, or she was a zombie. Or, in a nutshell, barflies break into their second home and kill the owners.
Yep.
They break into the Winchester. I forget what they do to the woman who owns the place, but the man gets his head smashed into the jukebox. And of course he's a zombie, so he's really dead anyway. But now he's really dead. And it is their second home, the Winchester. Or it was. I guess it's broken and destroyed. Maybe they can fix it. And Liz and Shaun can go back to their heart's content. I guess Ed's not going anywhere now. He's in the shed. And he's a zombie too. All right, the numbers on Shaun of the Dead. Rotten Tomatoes critics love this movie. 92% of them say it's good. And 93% of audiences, by the way. There are 202 fresh reviews on there, only 18 rotten. The average is 7.8 out of 10. And those are among the best reviews for both Edgar Wright as a director, or a writer for that matter, and Simon Pegg as a actor. In fact, Edgar doesn't have any splats on Rotten Tomatoes. As a writer,
wow.
As a director, he usually writes his own stuff, by the way, but he wrote other things. Ant-Man, for example, he was supposed to direct that. He has a writing credit on that, but that's also a fresh tomato. But Simon Pegg has plenty of splats. His best reviews tend to be the Mission Impossible movies. Of course, he's Benji in that, Tom Cruise's technical aide. This film was 129th at the 2004 U.S. box office. Spider-Man 2 was number 2, then a couple of good comedies. Dodgeball was 19th, and Mean Girls was 28th. So we've covered all those movies on one podcast or another. Dodgeball was on my sports movie podcast, Scoring at the Movies I do, or used to do with Chris. Some good funny movies that year. And this was also up for some BAFTAs and won several Fangoria awards, but got no Oscar nominations. The screenplay maybe, and certainly the editing would have been worthy.
Oh, yeah. The editor, I think he had already won, actually, an Oscar when this... No.
He won for Slumdog.
Slumdog Millionaire, which was after this.
4 years later.
Yeah, he has a great resume.
He also worked on Hot Fuzz, as many of these people did, of course.
The two funniest movies Edgar Wright has made, in my opinion.
We said when we covered Hot Fuzz, the only other Wright movie we've covered before, and I think the only Pegg movie we've covered before, we said that we like Edgar Wright as a person. He's great on podcasts. Doug loves movies. He's been on that lots of times. He's such a movie fan. He knows so much about films, as does Pegg. And these guys are very likable. And by the way, when you were doing your skinny there, I was hearing Ed and Shaun, which I've heard thousands of times, but it finally hit me. Ed, Edgar, and Shaun is almost the same as Simon. 5 letters, starts with an S. And
these guys... I mean, Shaun rhymes with Dawn. That's the obvious reason why they would have chosen Shaun, but it is also, really close to Simon. Yeah, you're right.
And these guys, not that Nick Frost isn't their friend too, but these guys are really the representations of these two characters in a way. I don't know if Edgar is a loafer like Ed is, but anyway. So what was my point? I lost my train of thought there.
That we like Edgar Wright.
Right. But we don't love
his movies.
Last Night in Soho.
Yeah.
We didn't. Well, we like Baby Driver. I've only ever seen it once.
I'm so impressed by Baby Driver. I'm so impressed by Scott Pilgrim versus the World. But they're movies that I just don't feel compelled to go back to over and over again. They don't grab me. Or at all. Hot Fuzz, I love with all my heart. I could watch that movie any day of the week. Every time I go to watch Scott Pilgrim, the first half hour, I'm like, why don't I love this movie? It's so cool. Visually, the elements, it's so creative.
It's funny.
It's so funny. It's so well done. By the time the movie's over, even though it's barely 90 minutes, I'm like, can I move on yet? I don't know what the magic formula is that's missing in his films that are so well made.
Especially when that same style works so well in this and in Hot Fuzz.
Yeah.
But then we also don't even love the third part of the Cornetto trilogy.
No.
What's it called again?
The World's End.
The World's End, right. With Pegg and Frost effectively having reverse roles for once in that one, where Pegg's the ne'er-do-well. Nick Frost is the responsible one. And there's also Martin Freeman in that group, and I forget the other guy. Martin Freeman's in a lot of Wright's movies, too, at least the Cornetto trilogy. He's got small roles in this, Hot Fuzz, and a major role in that, actually. But even that one I don't love. I like it. I saw it in the theater, and I would watch it again. I have watched that one twice.
Yeah, we'll never miss an Edgar Wright movie in the theaters.
Like we do with Wes Anderson or QT or PTA. But love him, don't always love the results. Anyway, you're not as big a fan of this movie as I am. This is my favorite of his 5 or 6 or 8 movies, whatever he's done. And Pegg, for that matter, one of the best things he's done, if not the best thing he's been involved in. It's still so funny. It does get pretty serious towards the end. It becomes a true zombie movie, mostly, in the last maybe half hour. But I love it. What about you?
Well, I cannot deny this movie's really charming. It definitely makes me laugh. I'm always disappointed by that last act where it just abandons the silliness altogether and becomes this more straightforward zombie film. Most people consider this the superior film of the Cornetto trilogy, right? But for my money, Hot Fuzz is funnier. It doesn't suffer any of the tone problems that this one does. I'm willing to admit that my preference could have a lot to do with my take it or leave it attitude towards the zombie subgenre in general.
Okay.
I like a great zombie film, but it has to be a great film for me to enjoy it. I'm not going to enjoy it just because it's a zombie film.
We hadn't had one in a while, by the way, until 2004, I think this is true, when both Shaun and Dawn of the Dead came out. The Dawn of the Dead movie, which I'm planning to do at the end of this month, Zack Snyder's movie, was a few months before this, at least over here. It was in the spring, I believe. And then for us, Shaun came out a little while later. In England, actually, at the same time. I guess Shaun probably came out before Dawn, actually, in England.
Yeah,
it's probably reversed.
The Zack Snyder Dawn of the Dead film is a great example of a zombie film that I do love. But I'm not going to love zombies for the sake of zombies. So a lot of the references in this movie definitely go way over my head. So I'm not the audience, but I think it's like a well-made film. I find Simon Pegg unbelievably charming in this movie. He's such a great leading man when he's cast correctly. He does like one of two things really well. He's either a lovable screw-up, punching way above his weight with a woman that he's about to lose and has to clean up his act to keep, or lovable sidekick, like the goofy comic relief technical sidekick in a franchise film.
Scotty
because
and
either
Benji.
Scotty or Benji, yeah.
That's true, yeah, and major films too. Star Trek, those guys did 3 of those, I think it is, and he's been in so many. I don't know how many now, maybe 5 of the Mission Impossible films with Cruise and Rames and so on.
He's just one of those actors, though. As soon as you see his face, you like the movie more.
Well, even though I love Ed in this, and I know you don't,
Oh, I hate him.
I think this is one of those comedies where the leading man, Simon Pegg, is the funniest person in the whole film. That is not common. I love you, man. I think maybe the funniest person is Paul Rudd. A lot of other people are funny in that, but I think he's the funniest one. I think that might be true here, too. Things like the scene where they are in the backyards. He walks up the ladder of the jungle gym, goes out of the shot a little bit, comes back down. I think it's Diane says to him, "Is it all clear?" "No." And then you see just how many zombies are surrounding the Winchester.
Again, very British, the best way.
And also, of course, the 2 different times he goes to the shop. The first time, it's obviously part of his routine. He's barely paying any attention to anybody else. But the second time, when he goes there and the apocalypse has started, people are in the same basic places, but now they're all dead, wandering around, looking to bite him, but they don't get close enough to. He slips on blood. That's my favorite touch in that sequence, and one of my favorites in the entire movie, when he slips on the blood, not noticing at all. You don't know it's blood, except you do know it's blood.
Well, you see the bloody handprints on the fridge that he doesn't notice because he's too hungover and dazed to...
Getting his Coke out of the fridge. Well, I'm just saying you don't see the floor.
Yeah.
I think the camera shots are exactly the same, or if they're not, they're millimeters off.
But it's so much funnier because you don't see the floor, because the audience puts it together. But we're so in his perspective that in the oblivion that he doesn't look down to see the blood, so we don't.
I read online, I love this touch. I don't think I ever noticed it before, despite the fact I've seen the movie 5 or 6 times now. Oh, what's his name? The guy who runs the shop. I forget. The shop owner. He says to him on that zombie day, "I owe you whatever cents." Not cents in England. Whatever he owes him. When he and Ed are getting in Pete's car to get away, you see this dude with his hand outstretched. And apparently that's the zombie version of this guy saying, "You still owe me money." I never noticed that before.
Because the zombies in the Shaun of the Dead universe still keep some level of their personality.
Yeah.
And at the very end, he's playing video games just like he always did in life.
His life really hasn't changed that much.
No.
His death.
It's the comedy, yeah.
Okay, you say you don't really like zombie movies, so you didn't get some of the references. One of the ones early on, I think I got this the first time I saw the film, is Foree Electronics. That's where Shaun works with those other guys. You weren't listening to him when he's in charge that day. The actual boss isn't there. That's where he gets red on him. His red pen gets in his pocket, setting up for the fact he's going to be covered in a different kind of red through the whole film, wearing the same outfit. This is about a day and a half long film, I think, as far as the storyline goes, until the very end when it's months later, 6 months later, when we see the final result was of the new zombie world they live in. But anyway, he works at Foree Electronics, and Ken Foree was one of the stars of Dawn of the Dead, the 1978 George Romero version. And speaking of Romero, he did not recognize when they screened this movie for him, "We're coming to get you, Barbara!"
How did you miss that?
That's Shaun's mother, Penelope Wilton, because that's, of course, his main character in Night of the Living Dead is Barbara.
And one of the most famous
The line,
quotes,
though, is, "They're coming to get you, Barbara." The brother says that before he even knows there's a zombie apocalypse, because some guy's walking towards her and he's just being a dick. "They're going to get you, Barbara." Well, they referenced that in this movie, and he did not recognize that for some reason when he saw the film. I guess he loved it, though, and he cast Edgar and Simon in Land of the Dead. I think that came out the next year. He wanted them to be, I guess, human characters in that, but they wanted to play zombies. And a lot of their friends, Edgar and Simon's friends, were in this as zombie extras. I always heard that Chris Martin, the singer from Coldplay, was one of them. But in preparing for the podcast, I read that no, we do see him as Chris Martin, which I guess makes more sense, right? Talking about some kind of benefit he and I guess a bandmate are going to do. At the very end on the news, right? We see the actual Chris Martin. I thought he was one of the zombies surrounding the Winchester, and I pointed out, well, that must be Chris Martin there. But I guess he didn't actually get into the zombie makeup.
Probably just one of the extras looks like Chris Martin, and fans thought, that's him, and started a rumor.
And I said earlier about the join us. Well, of course, that's an Evil Dead. Join us, join us. And what Shaun says to Pete before he knows Pete's a zombie is, we're going to go to the Winchester, whatever they're going to do, if you want to join us. But then, of course, Pete's become a zombie. That's another thing I love that Simon Pegg does in this when he calls upstairs, Pete. The way he does that, the look in his face. Pete. Because they're going to take his car. He's supposed to be invited to go along, but he's already a zombie because he mentioned he was bitten by somebody, as was Philip, bitten by somebody. And then, of course, their mother is bitten by the guy in the backyard who was supposed to be a friend of theirs. We don't see it happen. We just know it did happen.
I love her character. She just can't make a fuss. Oh, little old me.
Like my mom would be.
Bite. Yes, exactly.
Or your stepmom would probably be.
Yes. Oh, no, I'm not a bother. Oh, I just don't want anybody to worry about me.
But it's a bad bite. That backyard sequence is pretty funny. It's one of the last true stretches of great comedy in the whole film. We get laughs when they get to the Winchester, but not as many. The part where the zombie who bit Barbara, we learn later on, gets stuck with the tetherball. What's that what that is? That tetherball pole?
I think so, yeah.
But then Diane realizes, let's train everybody how to do the zombie thing. Very good. Nice moon work. But, of course, the mother, I'm sorry, dear, I was miles away. I like that she was miles away, not kilometers away, when she's English.
And you forgot the part where he goes to jump over the fence and the fence collapses.
That's right,
immediately. Because he has like a big speech. He's like, well, we're going to go. And I can't remember what he says, but it's this impassioned moment. And then he does this quite impressive leap over the fence, this athletic thing. But then the fence just goes down with him.
We'll get back to the plot in a second. Let's go through the cast here because I want to talk about something that I didn't know when I saw the movie the first time because I don't think I'd even heard of The Office, the British one. Or if I had, I certainly hadn't seen it. I saw it on DVD quite a long time ago. Didn't love it as much as I did end up loving the American one. I know that's blasphemy, but I didn't love the British one. I'm not a fan.
I did love the British one, for the record.
Ricky Gervais, I know, is playing a dick, and that's what he's supposed to do, but I've never been a big fan of his, so I didn't like that. I only got through the first disc of the first season, which is a couple episodes. But anyway, a few people in this were in that. Martin Freeman has that very small role as part of the Yvonne group, and he was the Jim of that show, I guess. And Lucy Davis, who's Diane, was the Pam. I guess she was Dawn in that. Yeah. Dawn of the Dead, how about that? And I do like her in this movie quite a bit as the friend, the loyal friend, who loves Davs, but knows that Davs is actually in love with Liz. But does she like Shaun?
Yeah, isn't there an indication at the end?
She seems to be into Shaun.
She sacrifices herself for David, so she is in love with David. Why would you put up with that from David, knowing he's in love with someone else, unless you really care for him?
I think she cares about him.
Even though he's such an ass.
He's a twat.
There's nothing endearing about him
as he's called at one point by Liz. Mm-hmm. You're being a twat during the Mexican standoff about Mum when they got to kill her, which they should do. He's not wrong. So anyway, yeah, Lucy Davis I do like in this movie. I liked her even more this time than I ever had before. And David Davs is Dylan Moran, who was in Notting Hill a few years before this, but also in Run, Fat Boy, Run with Pegg, which I believe...
Another one where Pegg is punching above his weight with a girl he doesn't deserve and has to earn her back by actually becoming a better person.
And I think David Schwimmer directed that, I believe.
Oh, no kidding.
I think it's him.
It's not without its charms. If you love Simon Pegg, definitely check it out.
I did see it, I think, because he was in it.
Yeah.
I've become a fan of his pretty fast.
It's the best thing about it, for sure.
As for Pegg, we've covered Hot Fuzz. We mentioned the Star Trek and Mission Impossible roles as Scotty and Benji. And the Cornetto trilogy. Nick Frost is in the 3 Cornetto films. Also in Fighting With My Family, which I covered with Chris on Scoring at the Movies. He's the dad. And he was in Paul, just a movie called Paul, that alien movie where they're still friends at Comic-Con, and they forget how they end up meeting up with an alien.
Seth Rogen's in that
Seth
one.
Rogen's the voice of Paul. A lot of big stars are in that, too.
It's not great.
I enjoyed it, but it's not great, you're right. Yeah. Maybe because the cast is so much fun.
I had high hopes for it because they were on such a winning streak, and I was like, this is going to be so good.
And it was not Edgar Wright. Maybe that's part of the reason why. It was some other director. Kate Ashfield, she is Liz. She had been in Tim Roth's The War Zone in 1999, the same year as Notting Hill, where Moran was in that, which is a very intense movie about, I believe, raping your own daughter.
Oh.
But she's not the daughter. She's got an important role, but she's not the daughter. Does a lot of TV as well, but otherwise I didn't really recognize any of her credits. There are not very many of them. I like her as Liz in this, though. I think she's pretty well cast. Bye, bye, bye. I like that on the phone. That's her sign off on the phone. Bye, bye, bye. Wilton was in Downton Abbey and a lot of English films. Her resume is pretty good, actually. And Bill Nye has been in so many great things, but we've covered him in Hot Fuzz. He's got a small role as one of the three cops. Martin Freeman, that's his role. It's Freeman, Nye, and Steve Coogan.
Yeah.
They're the three cops that send, whatever his name is, Nick Angel. There again, Nick, by the way. Names that connect.
Yeah, right.
He's Nick. We probably said that Nicholas, but he's Nick in that movie. Nye is great in a lot of things, but a lot of fun in this. And I like how he and Shaun make up when they're in the car, which is his car, the Jag. He doesn't want them in that car, but now they're all in there stuffed inside, including with Diane, David, and Liz. And he tries to clear things up with Shaun before he does turn into a zombie.
Yeah, he knows he's dying, so he wants to be like,
I know
he screwed it up, but
I did not have to be a
son.
stepfather. Yeah. And then they do. It's a nice little moment. Also, it does lead to a great laugh when he's inside the car still. They all got out. Nobody got bitten by him, but reaching ahead to try to turn off the loud music that Ed had played.
Do you think he's still in there? Yep.
He's got to be. And that moment, too, when he says to his mother about how, that's not my dad. Oh, Shaun, we've been through this. No, he was my dad, but he's not anymore because he's a zombie. So there you go. He finally acknowledges, yes, he was my stepdad, and I wish we'd been able to be close after all, but it's way too late now. Peter Serafinowicz, I think that's how you say that name, is Pete. He was the voice of Darth Maul, again, 1999. And also he's in John Wick Chapter 2, and he was the Tick. I think he was the Tick in the TV show, The Tick. I think they may have rebooted that, because I thought that was supposed to be Putty from Seinfeld.
Yeah, you're right.
Or am I thinking of something else?
Is there a cartoon as well? It's one of those things that I was just a little bit too old for when it started, and it's always flown a little below my radar.
Actually, look that up, I guess. I'm not going to. Jessica Hines, who was Jessica Stevenson, I guess she got married to some guy named Hines, obviously, is Yvonne. So Yvonne and Shaun. And she was Shaun's roommate and ladylove in Spaced, which we only saw, I think it was the early days of the pandemic. We finally checked that out.
We were late to that party.
Those two have great chemistry.
It is a delightful show.
I love her in that. She's so lovely, too. I'm surprised she didn't get more big things, because she's quite lovely, quite pretty as well. She's better looking.
Like, she has a girl next door look, accessible, but she's really funny in the show and lovable. Great to watch if you're an Edgar Wright fan, because you can really see where they got all this practice making this really cinematic comedy and having fun with all the gender bending and the satire. Often they would do an episode that would just be like a satire of a film style and have so much fun with it, getting the style right and the cinematography. And the tone is all there, that lightness, the sweetness, and especially the way that they create comedy with style. For decades, there's been this real reliance on performance-driven comedy. You get a funny person, you get a pretty good screenplay, and you let the camera go while your talent improvs and does most of the... Yeah, exactly. Perfect example. And the talent of the actors does a lot of the heavy lifting. And I'm not complaining, because tons of really funny films have been made this way. But it does make media like this, and I would add Lord and Miller or The Two Daniels, Wes Anderson, shows like Community. It's more special. It's more endearing. There's a different kind of effort and vision.
More cinematic.
Way more cinematic. And the jokes are denser because they're coming from the screenplay, they're coming from the actors, and the cinematography, and the sound mix, and the production design. It makes them so rewatchable. 20 years later, I find Shaun of the Dead, even though it's not my favorite, a more watchable film than, say, 40-Year-Old Virgin. I think it has a more forever quality to it because that extra effort was made.
A great example of that is when he takes off his name tag and he's in the washroom. I think he's in the kitchen as well. They mix that in there. And they do the same kind of thing as a cross-reference in Hot Fuzz when the guy gets blown up. He's making bacon and eggs in the middle of the night. And the two main guys, Pegg and Frost, are watching TV. They're watching Bad Boys 2 and Point Break, I guess. And we talked about that in Hot Fuzz, how they cross-reference those two things with all kinds of fast cuts. It happens more than once in this, I think, but the one I always think about is when he takes off his name tag, puts it on the bathroom counter and all this. You could show all those things in any movie, but it would probably just be he does it versus boom, 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 boom. I think what happens in Hot Fuzz is when one of them is peeing, probably Simon Pegg is peeing, but then there's, I think, water being poured into a coffee pot by the other guy who's about to be blown up. So that's a funny cut as well.
Yeah.
They don't make a gross joke like that in this, but they do have that same style of those fast cuts of unimportant things. Maybe that's why Wright does it that way. These things don't really matter, but I want to show the progression of what this guy's doing. Let's go boom, boom, boom.
And he doesn't just think, we need to get from point A to point B, so we'll just go from this scene to that scene. He thinks that, but he goes, what's the most creative way I can do this? What's a way to just inject a little extra fun? Keep us on our toes, keep us interested, and delight us, because it's so delightful. I think all of Edgar Wright's films are immaculately edited, so fun, so creative, so ambitious. but the montage of them coming up with the plan. And they visually show you the plan. And it's so silly. It's bonking Philip on the head. Sorry. And each time it gets faster. Each time.
Mom's always smiling.
Mom's always smiling. Yay, my husband's dead. Let's go to the Winchester. The way it's like their fantasy, the way it is illustrating something to the audience about how these guys have not actually thought this through. They're being selfish. They're being childish in this fantasy idea of how their plan is going to go. But also, it's so funny to watch the way that each of the montages changes. Each of them get a little bit faster. There's so many ways you could do that, and he just found the funnest way to do it.
That's true, too. Finishing out the cast, Rafe Spall, so the son of Timothy Spall, who was in Hot Fuzz as well, is one of the annoying guys that works at, well, the one who has the dialogue with Shaun at the electronics store. Joe Cornish, who was a friend of, he's made his own film since. I think he did Attack the Block, which Wright produced or co-wrote or maybe both. But Cornish is in this. I think he's a zombie. But anyway, he's involved in this in some way. We hear the voice of Rod Brydon, so the Steve Coogan friend from the Trip movies.
Oh,
where they do the impressions of people like Michael Caine. She was only 15 years old, which they both do impeccably. I can't do it nearly as well as them. Coogan's not in this, though, I don't believe. Maybe they didn't know him yet or couldn't get him. And other friends from Spaced have small roles in this. And the news anchors are legitimate news people, which we had last week when we covered Nightcrawler. Not entirely. I believe the two people we talked about towards the end of the podcast were both actors. Maybe that guy was a newscaster and is an actor. Looking him up, actually. I think he might have been. Anyway, but here you've got legitimate news anchors doing that job. The guy we see many times on the air is an actual journalist. The one we see later on, 6 months later, talking about how, I can't believe I had to say, cut off the head or remove the brain on a newscast.
Yeah.
And just like Zombie being referenced by Ed, I guess that's a reference to the fact that 2 years earlier, actually I guess less over here, but it was 2 years earlier in England, when 28 Days Later came out, the Danny Boyle movie, he didn't like when people would call the infected people zombies, because they weren't to him, they were just infected. Even though it's obviously a zombie story, effectively. So that's one reason why Ed says zombie so much, and why Shaun is always telling him, don't say that.
Don't say the Z word.
Right, that's a reference to what, I guess, Boyle was telling media people.
Sorry, correction. I get to say, don't say the Z word, because it's an English film.
And we're a Canadian.
And we're Canadian, so we also pronounce it Zed, and it's refreshing to hear Zed.
Did he say Zed or Z, though?
I'm pretty sure you heard him say Zed, and I was like, yes.
We talked about references, by the way. I didn't get this one the first couple times I saw the film. He fails to book a table at Fulci's. I think they pronounce it that way, or Fulci's. That's a director of classic giallo Italian horror films from many years before. So he fails to book the dinner, and then Liz is mad. He goes over there to beg, taking the flowers he bought for his mother, that Philip basically told him, come over see your mother and all that, and make up. But then she's mad that he's got the flowers.
She has every right to be mad at him. That's the point. The audience is supposed to be like, no, he deserves to lose this girl.
Well, the very opening shot of the whole movie is him drinking beer and smoking the pub, and Liz nicely, but scolding him. And David and Diane are sitting right there, too. They don't want, especially David, want her to be with him anymore because he is a ne'er-do-well loser. She's on him about making changes. He says he will. Nice moment, though, too, when he throws his cigarettes away and says, what's the next thing I got to stop doing? So then they're there. I think it's Liz that takes them, so she has them later on so they have something to smoke. Because she's not supposed to smoke either anymore, but she took the cigarettes and probably had one at some point in there. And something that I love reading online, I remember I read this years and years ago, so I've always remembered this. Ed predicts what they're going to do the next day. The references to things like Bloody Mary, well, that's Mary in the backyard, the waitress that they push through, the thing that blasts through her stomach, and then they have to kill her with the tools and the records and all that stuff, and the big chunky guy. But the things he says they end up doing, about all the things we're going to do when they end up back at the Winchester, of course they end up at the Winchester. As for that backyard fight, when they are throwing the records, that's a good little thing too. What is it, the Rain Man? No, Batman soundtrack. Whip it, throw it.
Why throw records? They're not going to hurt anybody. They probably would do more harm still in their sleeves than on their own.
But that's when he realizes, I got to go in the shed, breaks through the shed to get the cricket bat and the shovel for Ed to bash the two of them to death. Well, they're already dead, but to really fully kill them. And
certainly more effective than a pool cue, we learn later.
Right. And it's smart, too, that the two of them are knocked down, I guess, by a shot, but then the beating to death, super death, whatever you want to call it, we don't see that. We don't need to. We see blood flying on their clothes. Why waste your money on special effects when we know what they're doing?
Yeah, so and it's a comedy. We don't want to see actual horror.
Yeah, this is a very gory movie, but there isn't that much brutal violence. You do see plenty, I suppose.
Well, you see David get
pulled
eaten.
apart.
Yeah, at that point, it's a little more committed. By the third act, it does go all in. And that's the point where the film loses me, too.
Oh, another good comedy moment, one of the last true funny moments in the movie, I guess, because we're getting to the serious part, is when they do end up in the Winchester, and they are sitting in the dark eating peanuts, which I believe David said they'd end up doing in the first place. And because there's no power, that's what they're doing. Anyone want a peanut? Peanut, anyone? Whatever the line is, and drinking warm draft beer. Although, no, there's still a funny moment with Kill the Queen, when John, who runs the place, comes out clearly padded. The actor is so obviously seriously padded because they're using probably prop pool cues. Maybe they're real pool cues, I don't know.
But he's an old man.
Understandably, yeah, as they're hitting him.
Older man.
Doing nothing to this zombie except annoying him, really. But, kill the queen! Don't stop me now! I like that song, but I've always loved it even more because this movie made it so funny. And then John is pushing the jukebox, and then he's fully dead.
Another great Edgar Wright-ism. He loves to set action sequences to music, and he does it really well. Best
Baby
in
Driver.
Baby Driver. Outstanding. Those car chases are out of this world. Each one set to its own song.
Shaun can't shoot the Winchester. There's a good payoff. That's a good setup, too, about how Ed is saying, that thing still works, the actual Winchester rifle above the bar. And Shaun's always saying, no, it doesn't, but it does. They have 29 shells to use. Shaun can't hit anything. But through all this, his mother has died. That's a very sad scene. Then there's a standoff about what to do about his mother. David's right, even though he's being a twat. It is Shaun that has to shoot his own mother. That's when David tries to leave, because he tries to kill Shaun. He pulls the trigger, but there's no more shells left in there. He would have put a hole right through Shaun.
It wouldn't be a zombie movie if the survivors didn't turn against each other.
Because every zombie movie, and Walking Dead, the TV show, is another example of this. Really, what the story ends up being, the real problem is us. Humans are the problem. Yes, we have to worry about zombies. But if we truly did bond and work together, then maybe we could live in this world somehow. This just happened, of course. And then at the end of the movie, the funny gag is that they are living just normally, including Rafe Spall's character just bussing carts outside of a store. They've got them tied up, and it's part of a show we saw earlier. Now the zombies are, going after meat or something like that, and that's a game show. So they are made figures of fun, and we are living with them normally 6 months later. At least in England, they're doing that. Of course, it's also a nice payoff, too, that Ed is bitten by Pete, the zombie Pete, who's not wearing any clothes, I guess, because he was in the shower. Other zombies bite Ed, too, but he specifically is bitten by Pete on the arm. But before that, Diane had this is one thing I didn't get. Diane loses her mind, I guess you could say that, when David's being pulled apart, which is, a pretty horrific moment. But she runs outside with his leg and clearly wouldn't live. Apparently, Lucy Davis has said, I climbed a tree and I'm gnawing on David's leg to survive.
Sure. Okay.
You walked right into them, which is what happens to Barbara in Night of the Living Dead. She sees Johnny, her brother, and I think he pulls her out into the crowd of them, and obviously she gets bitten and eaten by them while Dwayne Jones hides in the basement. Until that fabulous ending of Night of the Living Dead I've talked about before. We covered that a long time ago. That's one of the first times we ever did a Not 100 Project movie to break up the old movies we were covering at that point in the podcast, the old AFI films. We did Die Hard and a few others. And maybe actually the second one after Die Hard was Night of the Living Dead, leading in, I think, to Halloween that year, 2013. You said in The Skinny, of course, that Shaun lights the bar on fire and the three of them escape into the cellar. Ed is screwed because he's been chewed up so much. It is funny, though, before they get down there, the shells that Shaun had left on the bar are now being burned, but also going off and helpfully killing a few zombies.
Yeah.
So
probably hitting more than Shaun hit.
Would have hit, yeah, because Shaun's a terrible shot. But we get the payoff with Ed farting again. I'm sorry, Shaun. What? Oh, God. I'll stop doing it. You stop laughing. And you stop laughing. But you get a sweet moment where they touch heads like the characters do in Rain Man. And Shaun and Liz escape into the war zone, only to be found by the military. And Yvonne is with them. Her friends, by the way, her 6 friends aren't there, are they? I don't think so.
I don't remember. I don't think so either, though. Why don't you take an opportunity to defend why you like Ed? I find him...
He's funny.
A despicable character. Not funny enough to make up for the fact that there's just nothing redeemable about him.
He's a terrible person, but he's funny. I'm not going to use the word because it's very un-PC to do it, but when he's in the Jag, or maybe it's Pete's car, anyway, he drives up, gets out, what's up? N-words? The way he says that is very funny.
Okay, I mean, I guess you're more forgiving than I am.
Well, when they get to the Winchester and they've got to get inside, and this is really serious now, but it's a comedy, so Ed takes a phone call. Oh, nothing, mate. What's going on with you? I think it's a drug situation. He sells drugs to people, so he's not taking anything seriously.
It's fine that he's funny. What maybe bothers me is that Shaun likes him. Shaun is...
He's good for a laugh.
He's good for a laugh, I guess, but...
It helps that Pete is on him, as is in some ways Liz, about why are you with this guy still? Yeah, he was your friend 5-10 years ago, but you're still doing this?
And there's a difference between being friends with somebody and letting them sleep on your couch, piss off your
But
roommate.
the movie acknowledges with those characters criticizing him, Well,
Yeah,
you're
it's
saying
true.
now it helps. It's not like the movie's oblivious to the way he is.
And you might argue that Ed is directly responsible for Diane and David's deaths. Because if they had just listened to authorities and sheltered in place, or at least found a safer place to shelter because the house they were in wasn't really safe, but they could have gone to Shaun's mom's or Liz's apartment. Shaun's mom and Philip would have died probably no matter what happened. But Diane, David, and Ed would have survived if they had just stayed in Liz's apartment once they got there.
Sure.
And I think it was David who's like, we should stay. And David was right. Again, because he's right about Shaun's mom.
He's just a twat.
About Barbara. He's just a twat. So Shaun and Ed deserve some flack for dragging them out of there and then insisting on going to the Winchester, an obviously terrible place to go during a zombie apocalypse.
Yeah,
Everyone
especially
gives them a pass.
when David breaks through the window, but then the zombies break through the windows anyway.
At that point, get
The
back
other
in the
windows,
car.
I mean.
Go somewhere safer. Winchester is clearly compromised.
Well, you got to have the comedy. I think that's
But
the answer.
Ed needs somewhere to smoke.
Yeah.
As a former smoker, I have to say there is at least a small percentage of me that totally understands. I could not have survived a zombie apocalypse if I couldn't have smoked.
Well, most of the laughs that are in the last 30 minutes or so once they get to Winchester are Ed. Things like David and Shaun are arguing about, I guess, Mom, his mother, Barbara. And Ed, yeah, he's backing him up. Or the thing where he gives him the warm beer. He's your boyfriend. No, he's not. Here goes your beer. Yeah. Thanks, love. Yeah. So Ed is responsible for a lot of the laughs in the non-funnier part of the movie.
All right. I accept your defense.
I wouldn't want to be friends with him, but I found him to be a funny character. He's so lovable in Hot Fuzz, and still funny, but I think he's funnier in this. He's got the John Candy role in a way, too, the lovable, great big lug. Mm-hmm. He's not that big, but he's certainly bigger than Simon Pegg is. So Edgar Wright directed Hot Fuzz, of course, and Space. We've talked about that plenty already. He always writes his own, I think literally always writes his own screenplays for his movies, and did write Ant-Man. He was supposed to direct that, but they did basically fire him. I guess they didn't like his vision after all. But
Same as like Lord and Miller.
With Star Wars, with Solo.
Yeah, that's right. I think there's just some directors that can't be dirty.
You hire
right?
these people to do what they do, and then you don't like what they're doing during the production. This is on you, Kathleen Kennedy, with those guys, and it's on you, I guess, Kevin Feige, with Wright doing Ant-Man.
Don't hire Edgar Wright if you don't want an Edgar Wright film. There are certain directors that you just can't ask them to make a Marvel film the way that you want to look like every other Marvel film.
And Peyton Reed made a pretty funny movie in Ant-Man. There's a lot of good laughs in that. It would have been funnier if Wright did it, I'm sure, but Peyton Reed's movie was pretty good, too. Pegg wrote this with Wright, by the way, and he often writes his own screenplays. The producer was Neera Park, who always works with Wright. I believe she produced Hot Fuzz. And because this is a working title production, at least in some way, executives were Tim Bevan, I never know how to say that guy's name, and Eric Fellner. Movies 2, 3, 5 to 1, we watched our DVD, which didn't look very good on our TV. I thought it'd be somewhere streaming. I know it has been, but of course contracts end and then it's not on Netflix anymore or Prime or whatever, but we saw the DVD. Could have been better. The cinematographer David Dunlap does most of his best stuff on television, actually. Gossip Girl and House of Cards. House of Cards, for whatever faults it had, was a great-looking show.
Sure was.
I'm not sure he shot some of the best-looking episodes, but he was a cinematographer on that show. We mentioned Chris Dickens, who cut Hot Fuzz as well, and won an Oscar for Slumdog Millionaire a couple years after this. Does a great job cutting all the Wright films, and Slumdog is a well-cut movie, too.
Well, just 2 Wright films. He didn't work with Wright again. After...
Oh, he didn't?
I don't think so. I could be wrong about that.
But he helped establish the style that Wright mostly has kept on using.
He worked on Space as well. They would have all collaborated together on that.
And the composers were Dan Mudford and Pete Woodhead. Mudford often works with Wright and Woodhead. This is the only movie as a composer that I can see online. As for what happens next, well, the guys keep playing video games out in the shed until Shaun gets careless and Ed does take a bite out of him. He almost does in that last sequence with the best friend. You're my best friend. Then our heroes are screwed and, well, their lives would be about the same, wouldn't they? Even Liz's wouldn't change that much. I don't think Liz is that ambitious either, if she's with Shaun in the first place.
Fair
now
enough.
she's staying with him because they found love again. And also, what's she going to do? A lot of people have died. She may have to settle.
Not many people left, Liz.
David's gone. She never wanted to be with Ed anyway, so she could choose somebody altogether different, granted, but...
I think it's lovely that the film shows Shaun actually becoming a better person who tries harder. He becomes more responsible through the course of the film. He understands what his failings were, and he is trying to truly get better, not just win the girl because he killed the zombies.
And he can really run that electronics store now. The boss is supposed to be off sick. I guess the boss probably got bitten.
Oh, right, of course.
The boss is probably
maybe
dead.
he'll get a promotion. He'll be running that electronics store.
And he won't get any guff from Rafe Spall anymore, because Rafe Spall is a zombie too, like Ed is. But still managing to be useful as a parking lot cart returner guy. Okay, then. I love Shaun of the Dead in our first movie together here in Scary Movie Month. Not that scary. But it is pretty intense at the end. Your last thoughts on Shaun of the Dead?
It is a great comedy. It's so creative, and I think that it still feels special 20 years later, and it has heart too. Personally, I don't think it sticks a landing at the end, but I'm not really the ideal audience, so I accept that it might just be lost on me.
It's fast, it's clever, and of course very funny. I'm still a huge fan. I ranked this 9th on my top 10 list during our Comedies We Love podcast back in 2020. For that matter, I ranked next week's movie 10th. Now they're back to back here. That was not intentional. We'll get to what that is in a minute. I find both of them still hilarious. They're also fairly effective as scary movies, at least at times, this more so than next week's movie. Zombies are in many ways actually stupid villains. They're not actually in Dawn of the Dead when they become runners, or in, okay, they're not zombies, but 28 Days Later when they run after you. That's far more scary because they can actually catch up to you. It is actually a funny moment. Maybe this is the first movie that ever did the thing where let's just act like them and we can blend in. And they do, getting to Winchester. They would have been fine if Ed didn't answer that phone call and if David didn't break the window and draw attention to them in the first place. If they had just kept acting like zombies and they found a way in the Winchester, they would have been able to slip in there. In this movie, though, the love story between Shaun and Ed, yeah, between Shaun and Liz too, but really it's between Shaun and Ed, is quite sweet and even touching. It's the last scene, the two of them together, not him and Liz, although he and Liz are living together now. Look at her plan for the day, too. Next to nothing. Let's go get some coffee, do this, do that, come back here, watch TV, go to bed, which he loves. Thumbs up for that. That's what he was doing before, and she seems like she wants to do more ambitious things. Not at the end of the movie. Although it was maybe supposed to be a Sunday, and yeah, take it easy on a Sunday. We record this on a Sunday. You've got all kinds of plans later in the day, and so do I. Our taking it easy day was actually more yesterday. As if anyone really cares. So that was how we saw Shaun of the Dead. Bev won't be in your ears next week. That's your one Monday off this month. But I won't let you go podcastless. I'll be doing a monologue about another great horror comedy, one of the absolute greatest ever in the genre, in fact, and that's Young Frankenstein, which was my 10th favorite comedy of all time during the Comedies We Love podcast I just mentioned. You do love the sequence, putting on the words.
I don't love Young Frankenstein or the producers, but they both have two of the funniest musical theater moments in cinema. I hurt myself laughing both times.
Yeah, Springtime for Hitler and Putting on the Ritz. But since the both of us won't be here until 2 weeks from now, we'll save the coming attractions trivia question for that episode, not Young Frankenstein. And on October 21st, we'll be taking a look at a creature feature that influenced the way Spielberg directed the terrifying opening scene in Jaws, Creature from the Black Lagoon, which you've never seen before.
I've never seen it. I've always meant to. It's always been on the list.
And the creature is considered one of the Universal monsters, even though he came decades after the original ones did. The coming attractions trivia question for Creature from the Black Lagoon. The most famous name involved in the production is probably one of the three guys who composed the music. So who am I talking about? And I asked this question partly because once you see the movie, you might never forget that main theme that they use about 600 times. It's a really great theme, but it happens over and 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 over.
All right, so for the answer to that question, check out our podcast 2 weeks from now about Creature from the Black Lagoon. You don't have to wait that long to hear from Ryan again. He will be back next week with Young Frankenstein. You already know how to find us, but let me remind you to favorite or subscribe wherever you listen, which is also where you can find our archive of hundreds of episodes that are available for free. While you're there, please leave us a rating and a review. That is a great way to support us and the podcast. We're both on Twitter. I'm at Bev Ellis Ellis, and Ryan is at MovieFiend51. You can also reach us by email, haveyouveurseenpodcast@gmail.com, and you can find our podcast on YouTube. Our channel is at HYES Ellis. And to enjoy freshly roasted premium coffee delivered straight to you in Canada or the US, please go to sparkplug.coffee/HYES, where you can enjoy a 20% discount.
Before we go, I'm just going to say that we think we might possibly have come down with COVID again, even though we just tested negative, but you're not feeling very well as the hours tick by.
We were definitely exposed.
And I was exhausted. I got so much sleep and I was still really tired. I bring it up because we just talked about a movie about a communicable disease, which we maybe have again, but for the fourth time at least.
For the fourth time. I can feel myself going downhill, and I'm coming to the miserable conclusion.
So we may have to shelter in place for a few days. If you hear from people, go out in the shed and play video games. Well, Bev, you're my best friend. You're my best friend. Now get over here and let me have a nibble on your arm while we wait for all this to blow over.
And cut.
Bye, bye, bye.